In a world where it's right to conform, here's a man who departs from the norm. He rebels, he excels, the uncommon man of Amway.
So, my friends, it is 2026, and if you're listening in January of 2026, I wish you a happy new year. And as someone who is recording in the city of Chicago and someone who lives in the city of Chicago, I'm in a good mood right now because 2 days before I'm recording this, the Bears won their first playoff game in 15 years, and it was at home and against the Green Bay Packers. As far as I'm concerned, the rest of the season, the postseason, is moot. It doesn't matter. So, hey, I'm kind of in a good mood right now. Kind of. I might sound a little bit cold-y because I think I have a little tiny bit of a cold happening. Hopefully not too bad. But, anyway, I didn't tell you who I am, especially for those of you who are new, don't know this podcast. My name is Sean. And I live in this odd world of strange and miscellaneous and otherwise uncategorizable media for a turntable, and I invite you all to join me in the exploration of this world. And in this episode number 27, we're going to be looking at a record by the Sanborn Singers called A Bright New World, which is an album made to commemorate the 1971 World of Amway convention in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But before I dive into that, I want to kind of follow up on previous episodes. For one thing, in my record collecting thoughts segment in the previous episode, I talked about how to inspect records you're thinking of buying, but there's one important thing I forgot to mention. If you really, really want the record, but you really don't feel that it's worth what the price tag is asking for, whether it be because the vinyl isn't in good enough shape or the cover has some blemishes you don't like, it does not hurt to politely ask for a price reduction. Hey, the tag here says $15, but I noticed there's a big scratch on side 2, track number 3. You see that right there? Yeah. Can you do 13? If you don't go overboard with the suggested amount, the seller will usually agree to knock a few bucks off, especially at record shows. At record stores, however, be aware that the person who's working behind the counter might not be the owner or a manager, and ergo might not be allowed to haggle or even might not feel comfortable haggling the price. Also, my friends, regarding episode 26 and the record, The Next Step Is Up to You, from Ken McWhinney at the New England Mutual Life Insurance Company, sure as heck, after I released that episode, I found out some more information about it, specifically the standard vinyl 7-inch version of that record. Apparently, that standard vinyl version, and I have to say standard, because apparently flexi discs, you might remember that this record also appeared as a flexi disc. Flexi discs are apparently made of vinyl too, so I have to say the standard vinyl, and the standard vinyl version was pressed in 1962. How do I know that? Because a Discogs.com user told me. Well, how did that person know that? It goes back to something I've said multiple times in this podcast. The etchings or stampings or whatever in the runoff area at the end of a record side will often tell you a story. And in the case of The Next Step Is Up to You, the story is that the record was pressed by Decca Custom Records, whose Northeast plant was located at 619 West 54th Street in New York City, just across the street from Pier 94. They began making custom records sometime in the 50s. According to Discogs.com, you can identify a record pressed by Decca Custom Records by a matrix number in the 70,000 range and the 200,000 range. The matrix of The Next Step Is Up to You? MG 79,202. Now, I don't know how that Discogs.com user determined it, but apparently something in that matrix code indicates that the record was pressed in 1962, which kind of holds water because remember how I said there's the 70,000 range and the 200,000 range? Matrices in the 200,000 range were first pressed in 1964. And since this doesn't have a 200,000 range, it shows that it is likely from before 1964. The thing about Decca Custom Records is that apparently they advertised in magazines. Send us your tape and we'll send you 500 records for $200, which sounds totally plausible given the nature of the Ken McWhinney recording. So I thought that was interesting. So now that I've taken care of those little goodies there, I'm ready now to take a look at this episode's feature. I invite you to step into a bright new world. Amway is one of those companies that exists in a very specific American space. You may not know exactly what they sell, but you might have known someone who really wanted to tell you about it. The company was founded in 1959 in Ada, Michigan, ADA, that is, by Jay Van Andel and Rich DeVos, the latter who would eventually be the father-in-law of former U.S. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. That name, Amway, is short for American Way, which kinda sets the tone. It wasn't just a business, it was capitalism, with a motivational speaker's voice. This is giving me Glenn W. Turner vibes. Listen to episode 21 if you don't know what I'm talking about. But speaking of Glenn W. Turner, multi-level marketing pioneer with his infamous Dare to Be Great program, Amway is another big name in MLM. Instead of employees, Amway has independent distributors. Distributors would sell products, mostly household and personal care items, such as soaps, energy supplements, and cookware, but the real goal was to recruit other sellers, who recruited more sellers, who recruited more sellers, etc. Officially, this was about entrepreneurship, but unofficially, it was a lot of optimism. By the late 60s and early 70s, Amway was booming, and shock of all shocks, was accused of being a pyramid scheme. In 1979, Amway found themselves in a case with the FTC, who eventually ruled that Amway, despite findings that the company was guilty of price fixing and making exaggerated claims about potential income, was not a pyramid scheme because, well, distributors weren't paid to recruit, and distributors weren't required to buy a crap ton of merchandise that they couldn't sell. There were other reasons too, but the MLM industry exists today in the way that it is because of that FTC ruling. As for Amway, well, their real magic wasn't in the soaps and the cookware they sold. It was in their culture. Amway figured out pretty early on that if your business model depends on people staying enthusiastic in the face of repeated rejection, you gotta motivate them, and motivate them a lot. Amway created an entire parallel universe of media. There were books, pamphlets, speeches, rallies, and as you are probably aware at this point, audio recordings. In an era before you had such things as podcasts and YouTube, this would mean vinyl records, and of course cassette tapes and eventually CDs. Amway encouraged its distributors to listen constantly, in the car, at home, probably while staring at your ceiling, reaffirming your goals. Amway events weren't so much like sales meetings as they were revivals. There was cheering, there were testimonials, there was music. Success stories were treated like parables. This couple stuck with it, believed, worked hard, and now they own a boat. Of course, whether that boat was a yacht or a used rowboat, that's another story. But anyway, that brings us to the Sanborn Singers.
It's a big, wide, wonderful world we live in. When you're in love, you're a master of all, a surveyor, a gay Santa Claus.
Amway Amway released recordings of the Sanborn Singers. They were a polished, upbeat vocal group whose music lives in that very specific zone within inspirational, religious adjacent, and sometimes just plain religious, and relentlessly wholesome. I mean, put on a Sanborn Singers record, tap the speaker with a spoon, and maple syrup will ooze out of your tweeter.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to New York Island.
These Sanborn Singers albums were not advertising Amway or its products directly. No one is singing about detergent after all. Instead, the albums are about joy, belief, commitment, and singing out what you feel inside. And that's really exactly the point. The records weren't meant to sell you soap, they were meant to sell confidence, belonging, and the sense that you were part of something positive and meaningful. Corporate branding without logos. Amway was basically telling us, if you feel good, business will follow. Now about the Sanborn Singers, I should tell you about them, right? They were founded by Fred and Jan Sanborn, who were both professional musicians before they joined Amway. Jan was a pianist and composed original songs to be performed specifically for Amway audiences. The rest of the singers were Amway distributors and their spouses. The Sanborn Singers released several albums through Amway, including Sing Out for Free Enterprise in 1969, I believe that was their first one, Great Day, bang, in 1973, Sharing the Joy in 1974, and The Great American Dream in 1975. The Sanborn Singers also recorded O Little Town of Bethlehem and Jingle Bells for a various artists compilation that Amway released in partnership with Columbia Special Products called Sounds of Christmas. But going back to the sound of the Sanborn Singers, really, if you know Lovin' You Lots and Lots by the Norm Wooster Singers, if you don't know it, look it up. Or if you're familiar with the Doodletown Pipers, that's essentially what you're getting with the Sanborn Singers. As for the record itself, A Bright New World. You know I like to describe things. This is an audio podcast after all. The front cover is a picture of the Sanborn Singers. There, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 18 of them on the cover. They are posing in front of a structure called the Globe at Leisure World in Laguna Hills. Now, what the Globe was, if you know about the Unisphere that was erected for the 1965 World's Fair, was it 1964? That's basically what the Globe is. It sat on a spindle and would rotate very, very slowly, and there was a waterfall all around it. And that's what the Sanborn Singers are posed around. And they're all dressed uniformly and very of the time kind of dippy as well. The men are all wearing royal blue sport coats, very wide red ties, red and white striped shirts, and black pants. The women are wearing these long flowing white dresses, white cotton dresses probably, with thick red belts around their waists. There's a design across the shoulders and near the bottom of the skirts of the dress. I don't know how to describe it. It almost looks like a fractal or something. And interesting thing, I was wondering if maybe they were posed in front of the Amway headquarters. I did a Google Street View on Amway headquarters, and sure enough, right in front of their main entrance, there is one of these little globe structures. And I thought that was it, but I noticed there wasn't a waterfall until I flipped the record cover over and saw this notation on the bottom right in white text with a red background. Front cover picture setting courtesy of Leisure World, Laguna Hills, Calif. The back cover has a red background with white trim around it, and interestingly, there's the trim is about twice as thick on the right as it is on the left, and the font is a basic sans serif font, all white text, and at the top it has a track listing, and I'll talk about those tracks right now. Side 1 starts with what's called Wonderful World Medley. The first song in that medley is called It's a Big Wide Wonderful World, which was written by John Rocks, R-O-X, published in 1939, and it debuted in the Broadway musical All in Fun in 1940. Buddy Clark had a Billboard number 25 hit with it in 1949, and the song was also recorded by Les Baxter, Dean Martin, Peggy Lee, Jay and the Americans, Vaughn Monroe, Chris Isaak, and many others. The next song in the medley is Who Will Buy from the musical Oliver! Written by Lionel Bart. And then the third song, I didn't recognize it and Googling wasn't much help, but from what I was able to kind of pull together using various search engines, it is very likely a song called This Is the Time for Singing by Don Bessig and Nancy Price, who wrote a lot of religious songs.
This is a time for singing, sing out the joy that you feel inside.
It's mostly sung as an ensemble, but there is a soloist, and her name is Georgia Lee Hoops. The next track is What the World Needs Now Is Love, and it's pretty straightforward to the version by Burt Bacharach that you usually would hear. It is a solo singer, and the soloist on that is Skip Ross. The third track is listed as Sunny Side of the Street, but the actual title is On the Sunny Side of the Street. It was composed by Jimmy McHugh, who wrote the music, and the lyrics were by Dorothy Fields. Actually, the lyric credit doesn't really mean much because, well, it's an instrumental. It's piano-led with a small jazz combo. Think Vince Guaraldi Trio. If you like Vince Guaraldi Trio stuff, you'd like Sunny Side of the Street on this album. It was a jazz standard that was originally recorded by Ted Lewis in 1930. Arguably the most popular version was done by Tommy Dorsey and the Sentimentalists in 1945. Other artists who covered the song include Louis Armstrong, Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Dave Brubeck, Benny Goodman, Count Basie, Frankie Lane, Dizzy Gillespie, Willie Nelson, and Rod Stewart, and many more. The piano, by the way, was played by Jan Sanborn, and I believe she plays piano throughout the whole record. The only thing is it doesn't really have musician credits on the album, so I don't know who the rest of the band was, but basically the band is a very basic popular music combo, drums, bass guitar, piano, sometimes organ, sometimes electric guitar. But anyway, moving on to the next track, we have Western Medley. Yeah, another medley. It begins with the main riff from the Green Acres theme played on piano. And the Green Acres theme, by the way, was written by Vic Mizzy. Next thing we have is Buffalo Gals, just the chorus, just a few times. And that song was originally published in 1844 under the title Lubly Fan, Lubly Fan, by John Hodges, who was a blackface minstrel performer, although the song was most likely already well established by the time it was officially published in 44. Now, the song is best known as Buffalo Gals, but the town in the lyrics was usually altered to fit the audience wherever the song was performed. It just so happened that Buffalo Gals was the most popular variation. Other variations of the song include Pray Pretty Miss, Dance with the Dolly, and Rockin' Little Angel, the latter being recorded by Ray Smith in 1960. Bobby Darin, by the way, had a 1959 hit. It was a minor hit, only went to number 38. It was called Plain Jane, and the chorus in that song was based on Buffalo Gals. And of course, what mention of Buffalo Gals would be appropriate without mentioning its use in the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
Dance by the light of dawn.
The next song in the medley is Don't Fence Me In, which was written in 1934, lyrics by Robert Fletcher, music by Cole Porter. Kate Smith debuted the song on October 8, 1944 on a radio broadcast, and then Roy Rogers sang the song in the 1944 movie Hollywood Canteen, and again the following year in the movie Don't Fence Me In. The song was also covered by Frank Sinatra, Gene Autry, Ella Fitzgerald, Willie Nelson, Frankie Lane, David Byrne, and Bob Dylan, among others. The next song in the medley is called Bury Me Not on the Lone Prairie, which was a cowboy ballad also known as The Dying Cowboy, The Cowboy's Lament, Oh Bury Me Not, and Bury Me Out on the Lone Prairie. It was adapted from a sea song called The Ocean Burial and The Sailor's Grave, based on a poem by Edwin Hubble Chapin called Burial at Sea, and that poem was published in 1839 and was set to music by George N. Allen. Bury Me Not on the Lone Prairie was covered by Burl Ives, Johnny Cash, Tex Ritter, and Roy Rogers, just to name a few. It was sung by Bugs Bunny in several Warner Brothers cartoons, Woody Woodpecker in the 1948 animated short Wild and Woody, the adult Munsters in the final episode of the 60s TV show, and William Elliott Whitmore in the video game Red Dead Redemption. Once again, we have Skip Ross soloing on this particular song. And by the way, fun fact, all of the songs in the medley, except maybe the Green Acres theme, were ranked in the top 100 Western songs of all time by the Western Writers of America. Side 1 closes with a performance of The Impossible Dream, because of course it does. That song was composed by Mitch Lee with lyrics by Joe Darian, and it's from the 1955 Broadway musical Man of La Mancha, which was a musical adaptation of Dale Wasserman's teleplay I, Don Quixote, which aired on November 9th, 1959, during the third season of the CBS series DuPont Show of the Month. If you've been alive for probably more than 5 years, you have heard somebody sing this song. It was covered by Jack Jones, Ed Ames, Jim Nabors, Roger Williams, Shirley Bassey, Robert Goulet, Glenn Campbell, Andy Williams, Roger Whittaker, Sammy Davis Jr., Elvis, Liberace, Roberta Flack, Tom Jones, Morbin Tabernacle Choir, The Temptations, and John Cleese with the Muppets, and I'm not even scratching the surface of all the covers that are out there.
To reach the unreachable sky.
Roger Krause sings the solo on this song, and as do most of the songs on this album, it gets very dramatic and swells big time, especially toward the end. That's usually how The Impossible Dream is performed anyway. If we flip the record over to side 2, song number 1 is called The Uncommon Man. You heard a sample of it at the beginning of this episode. It is a dramatic ode to Amway salesmen, sung by Roger Krause. Again, there are no writing credits with this record. Every songwriter I told you about so far, I had to look up myself. But I'm going to wager that Jan Sanborn wrote this. I don't know for sure. The next track is another medley. This time it's called Oklahoma Bang Medley. So it is a medley of songs from the musical Oklahoma. It's mostly a jazz instrumental, Vince Guaraldi style again, with the piano taking the lead on it. And the first song in the medley is Oklahoma, the title song from the musical. The next is The Surrey with the Fringe on top. And then after that, Oh, What a Beautiful Morning. Now that part of the medley starts with dramatic swells on the chorus. It goes into a mellow verse, then a more dramatic swelling on another chorus, and then we hear some women vocalists singing a wordless melody. And then again, more drama, more swelling, modulating a bit with male voices joining, and then the entire chorale sings the last 2 lines. Seriously, it gets a little overboard with the drama on this record. The third track, I'm surprised they did not call this a rain medley, because it is a medley of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head and Singing in the Rain. The Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head part is a straightforward cover. It's barely distinguishable from B.J. Thomas's original version. And it goes very seamlessly into the next song, Singing in the Rain. Now, the credited singers on this are Jody Dutt, I'm guessing that's the man singing it, and the woman singing it is Sharon Delisle. I'm only guessing on that pronunciation. Her name is spelled Delisle. I'm guessing it's pronounced Delisle. But the way they do this song, again, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head is a straightforward cover. And when they go into Singing in the Rain, it's done in the style of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Sharon sings a verse, and then they both sing another verse of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head together. Singin' in the Rain, by the way, was composed by Ignacio Herb Brown with lyrics by Arthur Freed. The song made its debut in the Hollywood Music Box Review in 1929, and it has been recorded many, 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 many times, including for the movie Singin' in the Rain, as performed by Gene Kelly, and others who have covered it include Dean Martin, Adam Faith, Bing Crosby and Rosemary Clooney, Sammy Davis Jr., Leif Garrett, Diana Krall, and of course the great Taco.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, I'm happy again.
Fun fact about Singin' in the Rain, it went into the public domain on January 1st, 2025. Oh, and I realized I forgot to credit Oklahoma. Those Oklahoma songs, Rodgers and Hammerstein. So there we go. And anyway, the next song is Before the Parade Passes By, which was written by Jerry Herman for the 1964 musical Hello, Dolly, which itself was based on Thornton Wilder's 1938 play The Merchant of Yonkers, which was revived in 1954 under the title The Matchmaker. The song was famously sung by Barbra Streisand, but on this album, it's not even sung by a woman, it is sung by Roger Krause. The next song is yet another medley, and this is where it gets very Sanborn Singers. I don't know how else to describe it. It's called This Land Is Your Land Medley. So of course it begins with This Land Is Your Land. It's attributed to Woody Guthrie, but it's based on a gospel hymn called Oh, My Loving Brother, also known as When the World's on Fire. Next in the medley is Dixie, a song that originated in a minstrel show in New York City on April 4th, 1859, complete in blackface. And as many of you know, it became closely associated with the Confederate States of America. Next in the medley, Yankee Doodle, whose melody might go back as far as 15th century Holland, believe it or not. And the version that the Sanborn Singers do includes a couple of seldom heard verses. The next song in the medley, Kemptown Races, written by Stephen Foster, first published in 1850, and then another Stephen Foster song, Oh Susanna, first published in 1848. Then we have Red River Valley, which I think would have fit better in the Western medley, but regardless, it is a cowboy folk song of unknown origin, whose earliest publication was in the Milwaukee newspaper, The Weekly Wisconsin, in 1887. Another fun fact, this is the second record discussed in the My Weird Record Collection podcast that has Red River Valley. The other, Auto Harp for Students and Educators, in episode 3.
Please come sit by my side, little darling.
But anyway, the next song in the This Land Is Your Land medley is Dear Hearts and Gentle People, music by Sammy Fain, lyrics by Bob Hilliard, first published in 1949, with versions recorded by Dinah Shore, Gordon McRae, Dennis Day, and Bing Crosby. It's a bouncy little hometown type of song with a vocal by Georgia Lee Hoops. And the medley ends with a rousing reprise of This Land Is Your Land, and then the album ends with a hymn called God of Our Fathers, a short tune written in 1876 by Civil War veteran Daniel C. Roberts, who was rector of St. Thomas and Grace Episcopal Churches in Brandon, Vermont. The song was written to commemorate the centennial of the United States, and it's very marchy. It's almost John Philip Sousa-esque, I guess. Now, getting back to the physical description of the record, below the track list, there's text that's kind of split up into two columns. In the left column, there's a heading that says Convention Favorites. And there's a little bit about the 5 Amway conventions that had happened up to that point when this record came out. And there's a little bit about Fred and Jan Sanborn. Over to the right, there is a list of the Sanborn Singers, which includes, in this order, Bob and Lois Stonelake, Bob and Ruth Walter, Jim and Marshall Agner, Roger and Ruth Krause, Sharon Delisle, Georgia Lee Hoops, Pamela Cooper, Colleen Bidlack, Jody Dutt, Skip Ross, Glenn Cruzen, Ward Carlson, and Fred and Jan Sanborn. Underneath the list of the Sanborn Singers is a color picture, a small color picture of the Sanborn family, Fred and Jan and their 5 kids. At the very bottom in small text, copyright 1971, Amway Corp., Ada, Michigan, USA, made and printed in USA, and it has the Matrix catalog numbers. and the front cover credit. Now, something I had to point out in the most recent episodes was the spine. So far, the last several episodes, there has been no printing on the spine. So if you store your records in a shelf and you know which record it is by looking at the spine, you can tell by the printing. Not in this case either. There's no printing on it, so you can't tell. Well, what about A Bright New World? Guess what? There's no printing on the spine, but then again, the outer cover is so thin that you probably can't even really print on the spine, as it were. Oh, and one other thing about the cover, there is a horizontal red obi near the bottom of the front cover that wraps around to the back cover, of course. It's a red obi with white text in all capital letters, includes songs from the 71 Amway convention, and a new Amway song, ... The Uncommon Man. And the record cover is really, really flimsy. It's a lot like a European record album cover. It's that thin. It's not brown on the inside like most American record covers. It's actually white on the inside, but it's very, very thin, flimsy cardboard. But hey, this thing held up for the past going on 55 years. It's still in really good shape. And of course, my copy still has the shrink wrap on it. Now, the record itself, which now has dog hair on it because I dropped it and dog hair is all over our floor. It's a standard 12-inch vinyl record, standard thickness. It's not floppy. It's not really made all that cheaply. The label is kind of a royal blue, maybe a dark royal blue, with the Amway logo at the very top. And under the logo, it says the Sanborn Singers, and then A Bright New World. And below that, stereo 33 1/3 RPM. By the way, the font is kind of a silvery, all capital text. All that stuff I talked about was above the spindle hole. And below the spindle hole, it says side 1 or side 2, and then it has the track lists. And the tracks all credit the soloists if there is a soloist. And it actually has the times. So 425, 242, etc. And then below the track, actually, it's not all caps because the credited soloists are in title case. But below the track list, it says in all caps, Amway Corp, Ada, Michigan, and then VA 1445, which is probably the catalog number. And I wasn't able to tell where this record was actually pressed. I'm not that knowledgeable that I can identify it just by looking. Only certain things I can tell. It's definitely not pressed by Capitol Records, probably not pressed by Columbia either, or RCA. Now, I mentioned before that there are no writing credits on this. There are no publication credits on this. So I'm actually pretty sure, now that I think about it, that this record was not made available to the public. It was only available to Amway distributors as kind of a souvenir of the 1971 World of Amway convention. I'm going to guess that because this was not made available publicly, there's no actual licensing involved in using the tracks, which might be why there aren't any writers credited. There are no publishing companies credited. Now, what makes this record weird and kind of wonderful, actually, is that going by what I just said, it was probably never meant to survive. It was a tool, a motivational object, optimism on vinyl, if you will. And here it is, decades later, sitting completely disconnected from its original purpose in a used record bin. Specifically, the one that I have was found in a used record bin at Rediscover Records in Elgin, Illinois on June 19th, 2021, where I paid $4.98 for it. But if you find this album or any other album by the Sanborn Singers, you're not just holding the music in your hands. You're holding a snapshot of a moment when American companies believed that they can motivate people into success through faith, harmony, and a record pressing plant. And indeed, this Amway record is the American way at 33 1/3 revolutions per minute.
The uncommon man of Amway.
A few days ago, I stopped into one of my favorite record stores for the first time in 2026. Wow, 11 days in and I hadn't gone record shopping yet, but that's beside the point. I was in for sticker shock. As I do every time I go to a record store, I flipped through the new arrivals section, where they put the stuff that just went out on the sale floor before they actually file it where it all belongs. You see, I learned the hard way years ago that you can really miss out on some treasures if you don't inspect that part of the store, but that's a story for another day. There's a small handful of albums that I'm looking to replace for various reasons. For example, there's Stay Hungry by Twisted Sister, which I've had since I was 10, maybe even 9 years old, and it plays through perfectly, except there are a lot of skips during I Wanna Rock, the first song on side 2. That's not really a surprise because as a kid, I played the living daylights out of that song on some pretty subpar equipment, probably on that Mickey Mouse record player I talked about in the previous episode. More recently, there's Briefcase Full of Blues, which I purchased at Beverly Records in Chicago just a year ago. But much to my despair, side 2 on that copy was pressed severely off-center, so it plays back with a lot of very distracting wow and flutter. But going back to the store I was talking about before, while flipping through the new arrivals section, I happened upon another album that I need to replace, Off the Wall by Michael Jackson. That would be my third copy if I had gotten it. That's another album I had when I was 9 or 10 years old, but somehow it vanished over the years. My wife Lisa found another copy for me though, and I think she gave it to me as a birthday present, which is great, except once again there's a problem with side 2. Side 1 plays back flawlessly with very little, if any, surface noise. But side 2, it's seen better days. It's so crackly and scratchy. But lo and behold, there was a copy of Off the Wall in the new arrivals section with roughly the same vintage as the copy I had that vanished. But upon inspecting the vinyl, I saw a lot of scratches on the surface, so I passed on it. And then I saw the price tag, $24.99. Wait, what? Nearly 25 clams for a very used copy and one that's not in great condition? What's going on here? As I was browsing the rest of the collection, I saw a lot of seemingly high price tags on used records. Common single disc albums that have seen better days, $17. Why was everything more expensive all of a sudden? The store was under the same ownership. Is it that the landlord raised the rent, perhaps? Or maybe all those records I looked at just by an astonishing coincidence happened to be some kind of secret collectibles? Like maybe Off the Wall had Mike's fingerprints on it? Or maybe that beat-up reissue of Yesterday and Today was once owned by Anne Margaret or something? I don't know. But I walked out of the store empty-handed, not because of the prices really, but because I didn't really see anything that I wanted. Even if that copy of Off the Wall were only like, say, $4, it still wasn't in good enough condition for me. And yeah, I theoretically could attempt to negotiate a better price, but the owner wasn't working that day, and I didn't think that the young'uns working the counter would really have had any authority to reduce a price. But these inflated prices made me think of a social media post made by another of my favorite record stores. And I quote, "For the new year, labels Warner, Atlantic, and Rhino just hit us with a $2 to $4 increase across the board." The post also said single LPs will be $1 or $2 over or under $30, doubles will be well over $40. Soon, anything less will most likely be a new artist on an indie label. Sadly, the increases are not limited to music. We are seeing more line item tariff charges on everything, from incense to tarot cards to t-shirts. Luckily, we can offset it by carrying used items at prices you may even feel you are getting a deal on, but every day we get sticker shock on these new prices. Now that post is making me wonder if the inflated prices on the used records at the other store might be to offset the increased prices on the new records. That is, they didn't increase the prices on the new records, but distributed those extra costs among the used ones. But the truth is, the cost of new records is definitely increasing. Sure, it's very plausible that it's the tariffs because look at where new records are coming from. After all, the very best ones are pressed by Optimal Media in Germany. The Beatles' Capitol Records box set from 2024 came from MPO in France. Many new records are pressed by GZ Media in Czech Republic. Getting those discs imported here to the States certainly cannot be cheap. There are record pressing plants in the United States, but most are private presses owned by small indie labels, and in some jurisdictions it is literally illegal to build new plants due to environmental concerns involved in the construction. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to pretend that general greed on the part of the record companies does not contribute to the price increases. The popularity of vinyl has been highly publicized, perhaps even exaggerated, over the last few years. Even Record Store Day has gone from giving fans what they want to kowtowing to the corporate suits at record labels. But still, I can't help but think that it's the companies noticing the increased demand for vinyl. Sure, you might chalk it up to millennials or Gen Zers getting into it because it's some kind of trend or something, and that may be the case, but also many music consumers who get their music via streaming are starting to get fed up. Apple Music sucks, so they're switching to Spotify. Spotify sucks, so they're switching to Apple Music. Looking at comments about streaming services is kind of like airlines. If you follow what people on social media say, then you must conclude that the worst airline in the world is every one of them. Some people have tried both Spotify and Apple Music and hate both of them, or maybe they're finding that whatever streaming service they use, whether it's one or the other or neither, those services might not be carrying certain selections any longer due to agreements running out or other issues. So they're starting to consider good old-fashioned physical media, that once you have it, it's yours forever. And not just vinyl either, because compact discs are starting to make a comeback, and they never really went away. I still buy CDs, I never stopped. And also making a comeback, God help us all, are audio cassettes. As this all happens, my hope is that the portability of CDs and cassettes will lure enough people over to those compact formats so that they get the price gouging and that the price of vinyl, especially new vinyl, starts to level off again. As I record this, I'm only a few days away from going to my first record show in over 20 years, and I gotta tell you, I'm starting to fear that these price hikes are going to rear their ugly heads at the record show as well. I guess I'll be able to get back to you on that in episode 28. But for now, at the very least, I do have a nice record collection I can enjoy if the increased costs of records, both old and new, prevent me from getting more. And I'm thankful for that. If you are new to this podcast, it might help you to understand that I like to rate the records that I review on my Weird Record Collection. And I rate them in 5 categories. For one thing, local interest or usefulness, based on whether I think the contents of the record suit more locale or use, I guess. Also, in my ratings, I consider historical interest. Is this record a particularly interesting sign of its time? And I also rate records based on uniqueness, weirdness, and enjoyability. Now, here's the thing, though. I really struggled to determine whether it should be the usefulness or the local interest in which I should rate A Bright New World. Is it more of local interest? Hard to say. Is there a question of usefulness? Don't know. So let me try doing both. And I'm going to confess I used a pretty lame way of determining that maybe I should consider local interest. I looked up the Wikipedia entry of Grand Rapids, Michigan to check and see if it even mentions Amway. Well, the word Amway showed up 13 times, so maybe there is some local interest involved. So given that Amway is headquartered in Ada, Michigan, just inches east of Grand Rapids, and that Amway's conventions were originally held in Grand Rapids, I should definitely rate the local interest, which I think gets a 4 out of 5. If you're a longtime resident of the Grand Rapids metro area, or for whatever other reason you might love it, and many do, you might find this record to be quite an interesting souvenir. As for usefulness, that's a tough one. It's meant to be a souvenir specifically of the World of Amway convention of 1971, but it's not like the recordings are actually from the convention itself. I mean, these are clearly studio recordings, and the notes on the album also clearly imply that, in a way, the album is also a best-of collection. I'm surmising that A Bright New World was sold or given out at the convention, so in that way, it might do its job quite well as a souvenir, or really, if you're a fan of happy, dippy chorale music with a pop music backing, this might be useful to you, but I'll just be safe and be wishy-washy and rate the usefulness a 3 out of 5. But because I consider local interest and usefulness really the same category for practical purposes, I'm going to average those two together and give the combined usefulness and local interest rating a 3.5 out of 5. Historical interest? Hard to say. Amway conventions are not a thing of the past. They still happen, and nowadays they happen all over the world. But as for the actual kind of music on the album and the artwork and the people photographed in the artwork, very of its time for 1971. But think more Lawrence Welk 1971 than, say, Led Zeppelin 1971. So I think I'll give the historical interest rating 4 out of 5. Now, rating the uniqueness of the record is a bit tricky. Not very tricky, but a bit tricky. The genre itself, the motivational chorale music, is nothing unique, especially for its time. And believe it or not, Amway records, including private pressings like this one, are not all that unique. Several Amway convention records were produced, and they really aren't that hard to find, and they're usually pretty cheap on the resale market. So for uniqueness, A Bright New World gets only a 2 out of 5 from me. And of course, this wouldn't be my weird record collection if I neglected to rate the weirdness. And this, my friends, is why weirdness and uniqueness are not necessarily synonymous. I'm just going to come right out and say it, folks. This album gets a 5 out of 5 for weirdness. I mean, you go to a record store, what do you expect to see? The Beatles, Pink Floyd, Motown, Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, Maroon 5, Bruno Mars, stand-up comedy, world music, country, jazz, metal, etc. What do you not expect to see? Friggin' Amway! And really, how often in your conversations has Amway come up without a hint of sarcasm or an evil snicker? And for heaven's sake, side 2 opens with a hearty ode to the Amway salesman. And the cover, oh merciful sakes, the cover. This is a weird record. Finally, enjoyability. And here's where I have to get weird for a moment. I'm not going to lie, this can actually be a very enjoyable record. It's produced and engineered very well, although it could have done with a skosh more treble. The musicianship is nothing less than tight. And if you like harmony singing, you could enjoy the music on this record, especially if you're of the generation that enjoyed Sing Along with Mitch. I mean, yeah, someone might look at you funny if they walk into the living room with this record playing and seeing the cover on your little now playing cover holder mounted on your wall, but still, there's nothing not to enjoy, really. So I'll give the enjoyability rating 4 out of 5. So in coming up with a composite rating for A Bright New World, that breakdown will be 3.5 for usefulness and local interest combined, 4 for historical interest, 2 for uniqueness, 5 for weirdness, and 4 for enjoyability. If I crunched those numbers right, and the macOS Spotlight tells me I did, that's a composite of 18.5 out of 25, which places A Bright New World below They're at the Post and above Lil Wally's Dance Around the Christmas Tree. So that's pretty high up in the rankings. Well, everybody, that was what I could tell you about the Sanborn Singers and their album A Bright New World, made as a remembrance of the 1971 World of Amway convention. Do you have any thoughts on this record or anything else that might be relevant to this podcast? Well, in a moment, I'll tell you about next month's episode, but before that, I'll tell you where you can send those thoughts, and I will also give credit where credit is due, of course. My email address is myweirdrecords@fab4it.com. Fab4it is spelled F-A-B, the number 4, I-T. And in case you always get confused about I after E except after G or whatever, weird is spelled W-E-I-R-D. The website for this podcast, which also contains every episode's show notes, is very similar to the email address, except replace the @ sign with a dot. So it's https://myweirdrecords.fab4it.com. And at that website, not only do you see show notes, but you will also have other links to other resources, such as where you can find accessories for your records. And there's also a link that says buy me a coffee. And if you go to that link and click on it, you have an opportunity to help keep this show going financially. Pay for the upkeep, pay for the source material, and pay for whatever else that might be involved. Spoiler, not coffee, because I don't drink coffee. I don't like it. My Weird Record Collection is also on the socials. You can go to Facebook and look for My Weird Record Collection in the search engine, or you can go straight to www.facebook.com/myweirdrecords. There's a YouTube channel for My Weird Record Collection, and that's youtube.com/@My Weird Record Collection. I often post on Threads, and on Threads and other social media such as Insta and whatever Twitter is called these days, Blue Sky, and all those other wonderful quickie socials you have where they only let you post 200 characters-ish. My handle is @MyWeirdRecords. And getting the legal mumbo-jumbo out of the way, the sounds and music used in this podcast are the property of their respective copyright holders. Some cases, that's me, by the way, and they are used for commentary and review, and infringement is not intended. I offer a wonderful special thanks to the wonderful special Tim Christ, also known as Shoebox, also known as Worm Quartet, for letting me use his record, the Pac-Man EP, as the grounds for the logo of this podcast. Tim and his unforgettable music can be found on his website at worm-quartet.web.app. I also offer a warm embrace and big thank you to my buddy Kevin Zerby, who designed the logo artwork for this podcast, and Kevin and his music and podcasts are available on the web at zerbinator.com. Now, next month, because we have Valentine's Day, and the episode, which I believe is number 28, will be released the following day, better known as Gloat Day, there will be a record discussed that kind of ties in with the whole Valentine's Day theme in a way. Since we did a music record this time, we're going to flip over to spoken word. So until then, this is Sean, and I'm reminding you, support your local record store and also support yourself by taking care of your health, especially your mental health. I wish you all the best, my friends. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.